The field of 16 is set. Welcome to NHL Wraparound Short Shifts for Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. Vic and Neil joining you today. And, one of the things that I loved listening to throughout January and February and March was all these commentators saying, this is going to go down to the very last day of the season. Now, that is actually going to be true for positioning in the Western Conference. But the truth is, all 16 spots in the Stanley Cup playoffs were decided on Monday night.
Yeah, but it looked all season like it would come down to the wire, and it almost did. But teams dropped out. And the interesting part that I find, Vic, is that 6 new teams that were not in the 2025 playoffs are in the 2026 playoffs, which obviously means 6 teams that were in last year are not in this year. And that's a big change.
I love the unpredictability of it. And that from year to year, you had a President's Trophy team. Each of the last 2 years did not make the playoffs the next year. And you've had clubs that have jumped up, such as Anaheim and Utah and Buffalo, for that matter, that are now joining the playoff party after long droughts.
Yeah, and you've also got the steady eddies, the teams that you can look to be good year after year, like Colorado, Dallas. Minnesota could fall into that grouping. And then over in the East, of course, you've got the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Carolina Hurricanes that during the regular season you could depend on them to play well. They're not going to pull a Toronto Maple Leafs, New York Rangers, or Winnipeg Jets.
Let's get right to it. The East is set. The Buffalo Sabres win the Atlantic with a 5-1 win in Chicago on Monday. Tage Thompson with 2 goals, reaching the 40-goal mark. The Sabres entered that game needing 2 wins in their final 2 games to clinch the division, but that changed once Tampa Bay went into overtime against Detroit, and that swung the regulation win tiebreaker in the Sabres' favor. So they will play Boston in the opening round because the Bruins clinched wild card 1 with a 4-0 win over New Jersey on Tuesday. This will be the 9th all-time playoff meeting between these clubs. The Bruins have won 5 out of the previous 8, and the last time they met was in 2010, with the Bruins winning in 6 in the opening round. I think this is going to be a great matchup between division rivals, and just the excitement of Buffalo getting back in the playoffs is going to be great.
And this is 2 teams that did not make the playoffs last year. So there is going to be a team that didn't make the playoffs last year that is going to go on to the second round. How about that one? Because one of these 2 is going to have to win. It's going to be a good matchup. It's going to be 2 coaches that are up for Coach of the Year in Lindy Ruff and Marco Sturm. Well-deserving, by the way. Only 8 points in the standings separates these 2. That's not a heck of a lot. So they weren't that far apart as far as regular season, but it'll be a good one. That's a real hard one to predict what's going to happen.
Tampa Bay will face Montreal in the 2-3. The Lightning with a 4-3 win in overtime against Detroit on Monday on a goal by Nikita Kucherov. The Lightning are guaranteed home ice after Montreal lost in regulation to Philadelphia on Tuesday. The last time these 2 teams played in the playoffs was in the 2021 final when we were coming out of the pandemic, and that final game was played on July 7th.
And that was a year when Montreal won the Canadian division unexpectedly. Yep. Another year when Toronto was expected to win it and Montreal somehow knocked them out. That was a weird year because of the pandemic. But this year, this is going to be an exciting series. These 2 teams, obviously Tampa Bay, more used to this kind of competition, this kind of high-level playoff competition. But Montreal's an up-and-coming young team, and it's going to be exciting for both places, particularly when you get into the Bell Center. And also in Tampa, don't forget, there's a lot of Quebecois who live down in Florida during the wintertime. So expect a lot of those red jerseys to be in Tampa cheering on the Habs.
Did I ever tell you how much I enjoy it when you speak French?
No, you haven't told me that.
Metropolitan Division. The Carolina Hurricanes wrap up first in the Eastern Conference by getting Monday's game into Philadelphia into overtime. They will play Ottawa, who finishes as wild card 2. The Senators got locked into that spot with Boston's win on Monday night. But the big story here, the Philadelphia Flyers clinching third in the Metro, and that assured a first-round date with Pittsburgh. The Flyers come back and win that game against the Hurricanes, 3-2 in a shootout. They came back from 2-0. Tyson Foerster with the shootout winner, and Dan Vladar with 24 saves, including all 4 in the shootout. The Flyers were wild card 8. On the morning of February the 26th, they finished 17-6-1 in their last 24. This will be the 8th playoff meeting between the clubs. The Flyers have won 4 of the previous 7. The last time they met, 2018 opening round, the Penguins won that series in 6. And that is the last time the Penguins have won a playoff series.
That's right. And I remember that series really well. So get ready for the Battle of Pennsylvania between these two teams.
How about for the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Washington Capitals? That game between the Canes and the Flyers must have been like death by 1,000 cuts, because I think they were really hopeful after the first period when Hurricanes get out to this 2-0 lead. Flyers come back and tie it. Once the game got to overtime, Columbus was eliminated, and then when the Flyers won in the shootout, the Caps went down as well.
Yeah, that would be a horrible way to go, watching TV and throwing things at the screen as you go along. Certainly, Columbus Blue Jackets not happy with the ending this year, when they thought that this might be the year when they'd finally get into the mix. And for a lot of the season, it looked like that.
Yep. Well, we're going to get back to Columbus in just a little bit, but we're going to shift to the West for a second, because of the 4 potential series, only Dallas and Minnesota are locked in. But in terms of clinchers, the idle Anaheim Ducks on Monday clinched their first berth since 2018, when the San Jose Sharks defeated Nashville. And then the LA Kings get in for the 5th straight year with a 5-3 win in Seattle on Monday. And that game eliminated Nashville, Winnipeg, and San Jose. The Sharks out for the 7th consecutive season.
Yeah, and the LA Kings, who looked all year like they were right on the bubble, they didn't know whether they'd make it. It ends up being a good move bringing in Panarin, because he scored a lot of important goals for the Kings, and probably without him, they might not have made the playoffs, particularly when you think about the injury to Kevin Fiala in the Olympics, putting him out for the rest of the season.
So here's what's left. So we just said 3 series matchups still remain. The Colorado Avalanche are waiting for their first-round opponent. That will be wild card 2. And that could be the Kings, it could be the Ducks, and it could be the Oilers. Now, Vegas can clinch the Pacific Division on Wednesday with 1 point against Seattle. They beat the Winnipeg Jets 6-2 on Monday. They're 6-0-1 under John Tortorella. And if that happens, that would assure a date with the Utah Mammoth, who clinched the first wild card on Tuesday with a 5-3 win over the Winnipeg Jets. The current standing of the Oilers, Ducks, and Kings is like this. Edmonton, second in the Pacific, 91 points. They have the regulation win tiebreaker over both Anaheim and Los Angeles. They lost 2-1 in a shootout to Colorado on Monday. The Ducks, third in the Pacific, 90 points. They have the regulation win tiebreaker over the Kings. They lost 3-2 to Minnesota on Tuesday. They are 2-6-2 in their last 10. The Kings still in wild card 2, 90 points. They lost in overtime to Vancouver on Tuesday. The Kings have gone to OT 33 times this year. That is an NHL record, and they have lost 20 of those. And I couldn't believe the stat that Ray Ferraro said on that telecast last night. Darcy Kemper, 0-15 in games beyond 60 minutes. So I guess if Kemper plays, and the Kings are going to overtime in the playoffs, I know where my money's going.
Well, maybe they'll switch goaltenders. Maybe DJ Smith will pull them and put in the backup.
So if you're the Kings, how do you like this? Because any of these three teams that we just mentioned can either finish second or third or wild card 2. But if you're the Kings and you finish wild card 2, you get the Colorado Avalanche. But if you manage to finish second or third in the Pacific, you might get the Edmonton Oilers, who have taken you out each of the last 4 springs.
It's not a good way either way. The only thing that's good is that they made the playoffs. So Anze Kopitar gets one more crack at the playoffs before he retires. And the LA Kings get in, which is a tough market. They wanted this badly. Luc Robitaille, Ken Holland wanted to get into the playoffs badly. It's a big market. People were not happy. They had to fire their coach during the season. And you know what? I think anything from here is gravy, but you wouldn't want to play the Oilers and have that happen again.
The schedule for Thursday, the final night of the NHL regular season, Anaheim at Nashville, 8 o'clock, Vancouver at Edmonton, and Los Angeles at Calgary at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. A couple of other items I want to get to here, Neil. The Philadelphia Flyers beat Montreal, and the Minnesota Wild beat Anaheim on Tuesday. This despite both the Flyers and the Wild sitting most of their stars in this game. But do you see a difference here in terms of sitting players against teams that have clinched but are still jockeying for position, as opposed to teams that are still just trying to make the playoffs? And this was a debate that we had on Monday.
This doesn't make sense. It doesn't hold. These two teams both had playoff positioning at stake. So the question's not valid. Montreal could have moved up in the standings. Montreal can change. So could have Anaheim. So Minnesota rested their players against a team that the game meant something to.
And still won, though.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. That's got nothing to do with it. I wouldn't feel any differently because it's exactly what I was talking about. So there's really no question there.
You know, when we think back to last year and this argument of whether you play players or don't play players, remember that for the Dallas Stars, Jason Robertson got injured in a meaningless game 82, and Peter DeBoer took a lot of heat for that, and Robertson didn't come back until the second round of the playoffs. And that's the risk that's run.
Yeah, but still, you can't have it both ways. You
Can
can't
we have it
you can't.
anyway?
No, the league should be enforcing it, and they're not. So, I mean, they're encouraging you to sit out players because of what you just cited with DeBoer. So he could have sat him out. He didn't. He did the right thing. And the guy gets hurt. Now he gets blamed because you didn't do the wrong thing. You should have taken him so that we couldn't see him play. The Dallas fans are saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's stupid.
But that's a risk-reward thing, though. And the risk was he got hurt.
The rule's the rule. There's no sense even discussing it anymore because it is what it is. It's like saying you should change a law. Well, you could, but they haven't, so it is what it is.
I'm not moving you on this, so I'm going to move to the next item. Did you hear Rick Bowness, Blue Jackets head coach, after their season-ending loss to the Capitals on Tuesday? They finished the season 2-8-1 in their final 11. According to the stat sheet, they almost pitched a no-hitter because there were 3 recorded hits, 23 giveaways, and after the game, Bowness said, terrible and inexcusable. These guys don't care, and they wilted amidst the pressure of the playoff race. Now, Bowness is 70 years old. He will meet with Don Waddell to discuss his future, but he said, if I'm back, we're changing this friggin' culture.
And we thought he had changed it, didn't we? Because they went on such a great run, but they didn't under extreme pressure to make the playoffs. At the end of the day, they did wilt, and only he knows what he saw in their eyes in the locker room and so on. And I can understand how frustrating it must be for him. He wants to come there as a renowned coach, make a difference, probably he saw a difference. I know he said to me outside the locker room at UBS Arena, these guys are playing for each other. They really care. Well, obviously that tune has changed. So I feel for him, and we'll see whether he comes back or they move to a different coach for next season.
Injuries of significance. Edmonton Oilers have a pretty big list, and not everything is undisclosed. Leon Draisaitl, lower body injury, remains on target to return at some point during the first round. Zach Hyman, who has been out the last few games, might go in the season finale Thursday against Vancouver. Jason Dickinson out day-to-day with a leg injury, and forward Max Jones week-to-week with a lower body injury. For the Utah Mammoths, Sean Durzi, defenseman, left Tuesday's win against Winnipeg after blocking a shot with his hand. We'll see if we can have an update on him by the end of the week. We also have Rupe Hintz out at least for the first two games of the postseason against the Minnesota Wild. He has only played one game since the Olympic break. A couple of returns to talk about. Cale Makar of the Colorado Avalanche returned in the Avs win in Calgary on Tuesday after missing 7 games with an upper body injury. He assisted on all 3 goals, including Nathan McKinnon's 53rd, that one coming into an empty net. And Brady Tkachuk, who got dinged against the Islanders last weekend, he's going to play in the regular season finale for the Senators against the Detroit Red Wings. So good news for the Sens there that they will have their captain back.
That is really good news because Brady Tkachuk is the key piece to that team and the culture they have and the way they play.
And now it is time to do a little bit of spring cleaning. And we've already done 7 clubs that have been eliminated from the playoffs. We're going to do 3 more in this show. And then the other 6 teams, the Islanders, Blue Jackets, Capitals, Predators, Jets, and Sharks, will come out as quick takes over the course of the next couple of weeks. The Detroit Red Wings were eliminated on April 11th, and the expectation for Steve Yzerman and Todd McClellan behind the bench was to make that step, end that 9-year playoff drought. They had a relatively quiet offseason with their key acquisitions being John Gibson and James Van Riemsdyk, but the reality is they are now out 10 years in a row. This Red Wings team was 32-16-5 on January the 25th. They were first in the Atlantic, and they were 10 points clear of a playoff spot. John Gibson was good. He was close to cracking the top 10 in goals against average, had a save percentage of over 900, but I think too much of the same at the top of the scoring list, Neil, where it's Dylan Larkin, it's Alex DeBrincat, it's Patrick Kane, it's Lucas Raymond. Moritz Seider had a career year, reaching 60 points, had highs in goals and assists, but after that, very, very little down the middle. And I look at guys like Marco Kasper, who dropped from 37 points last year to under 20 in 25-26.
That secondary scoring certainly didn't come through for them. And just as you say, you can't keep depending on the same guys for 82 straight games and not get anything being chipped in by other people. And they had very little. And John Gibson was, as it turned out, a good acquisition. He did solve their goaltending situation. JVR is an older guy. He's on his last legs, age-wise. But I thought he contributed pretty well for the Detroit Red Wings in the role that he was asked to play. But as you said, they needed more than just the same old, which was Larkin, DeBrincat, Kane, Raymond, Seider. They needed more.
What does it also say to you that this team, the last 5, March and April, have not had any sort of kick at the end to get this over the finish line? And you could hear the fans at Little Caesars Arena, and you have said many times already that they haven't seen a playoff game there. Obviously, they're not going to see one again this spring. And a fan base like that, it's Hockey Town, it's renowned. The history of this franchise is unmistakable. And for this team to go a decade under now the stewardship of Steve Yzerman since coming back over from the Tampa Bay Lightning, this is a hard one to swallow, particularly this year, particularly where this club was before they hit the skids.
And you got to think that there's going to be a major shakeup within the senior group on the ice. And I'm talking about Larkin and so on. As much as I love Dylan Larkin as a player, as a captain, he's led them to no playoffs so far. And as you said, the part that's really bothersome is how they come down the stretch during the regular season. They have these bad month of March every year. And that's when leadership has got to stand up and get the group to play hard. And they haven't been doing that. So I look for a major shakeup in what's going on in Detroit. And when I say that, I don't know if McClellan will be back. I'm not sure if Steve Yzerman will still be the GM or will he be something else. But I would say you're going to see some real change in Detroit.
When the Wings acquired Justin Faulk at the deadline for St. Louis, a lot of people said, okay, they're in. They're good. But they left a lot of points on the table late. And now as we look ahead for this club, they do have $11.1 million in projected cap space. But in terms of draft picks, they only have 6 selections in the 2026 draft. They have none in the first or the third rounds. They were given up in that Falk deal. They do have 2 picks in the 7th rounds. The UFAs are Patrick Kane, David Perron, JVR, Travis Hamonic, backup goaltender Cam Talbot, their RFA, Simon Edvidson, defenseman. Here's a spot here that, yes, you can sign free agents, but you don't have a lot in your pipeline now. Your secondary scoring, as you had said, had underperformed. And I don't think that there's a high expectation that that is going to get an appreciable bump to change this narrative in the 2026-27 season.
And Steve Yzerman is not a big risk taker. So we haven't seen a lot of rolling of the dice by Stevie. The Justin Faulk deal was, that was unusual for him to go and give up future for Justin Faulk, and then it didn't work. So we'll see what we see in the offseason. It's going to be a real interesting one. One of the more disappointing situations in the league this year was Detroit not being able to get back in.
The St. Louis Blues were eliminated on April 11th. The expectation, relatively high, probably for a wild card berth, because they were not really up there with the heavyweights in the Central. But they had come off that surprising 2024-25 season under the tutelage of Jim Montgomery and that near first-round upset of the President's Trophy winning Winnipeg Jets in the first round. But the reality for this team is that they went through slides of 1-6-2 and 1-8-1. That's almost a quarter of your schedule right there. They had no 25-goal scorers. They had drop-offs, production from Robert Thomas, although he did spend considerable time injured this year, and also Jordan Kyrou. Jordan Binnington had a brutal season, and late in the year, Joel Hofer was the go-to guy in net for the Blues.
Yeah, there was some controversy there, and I know Jim Montgomery was very unhappy with the performance of the team and looking for resolutions that he couldn't find to try to dig their way out. They were basically at the back of the pack right from the get-go, right from the start to the end. And they really didn't compete with the Utah Mammoth the way we thought they would. We thought they'd both be going at each other for that wild card spot, but they really didn't. And the Mammoth ended up being clearly decisively better than the Blues this year.
The work ahead for this team is very interesting. And Alex Steen is going to be taking over for Doug Armstrong effective on July 1st, but he has been really preparing himself for this job for the last 2 years. The Blues have 12 picks in the 2026 draft, 3 in the first round, their own, and also the picks from Detroit and the Islanders in the Justin Faulk, Braden Shen deals. They had none in the second, but they had 3 in the third round. Those also coming as part of those aforementioned deals. Those were picks that were previously owned by the Sharks and the Devils. They also have 2 picks in the 4th and the 5th rounds. This team has only $1.84 million in projected cap space. Their UFAs, Oscar Sundqvist, but their RFAs get interesting. Jonathan Berggren, forward, defenseman Matt Kessel, and the big one here, Dylan Holloway, who came over as an offer sheet signee. Could you imagine him now being tendered by another team?
I can't really imagine that happening, but they got their work ahead of them. That's for sure. They got to start to show now that they're building towards the future. I mean, last year was a year that looked like a disaster at the beginning, and then Jim Montgomery came in and saved the year. This year, he just couldn't do it. As you said, it's going to be Alex Steen at the reins. We've seen Doug Armstrong there for so many years, and he's going to have to do some handiwork on Dylan Holloway and Berggren and Kessel for sure.
So if you're looking at this from 30,000 feet, you don't have a lot of cap space, but you do have a dozen picks in this draft, which is supposed to be a good draft. What would be your approach just to get this team back into the playoffs? I don't think you're going to see this team as a Stanley Cup contender in the next 2 to 3 years. But if you've got this landscape in front of you, how do you get it back into the playoffs?
I'm not sure that you can get them back in very quickly. I'm not sure they're going to be there next year. You might have to do some real pruning of this roster and, move some guys that they're used to having around there and bring in some players. So, for example, Binnington, is there a market for him out there? Will he agree to be traded? Does somebody want a goalie that's won the Stanley Cup and that's been great in international play? And maybe you start from there and you move some people and completely reconfigure what you're working with here. Sort of like out with the old and in with the new. And Alex Steen's going to have some time to be able to do that stuff and implement things because he's brand new.
But he's also picked up a lot of asset in terms of draft picks, so perhaps these are good chips to play as well here.
They are, but the future is all St. Louis has, right? So they better be careful trading away draft picks. They better just be sure that they are making the right picks with these draft picks. You can always use some of them. Nobody can not trade picks anymore like we did in the old days and say we'll never trade a draft pick. You've got to use your picks, not only for drafting, but also as chips at the poker table. And I'm sure that's what they're going to do.
The Seattle Kraken were eliminated on April 11th. The expectation for this team, relatively low, missed the playoffs in 3 out of their first 4 years as a franchise in the NHL, only qualifying in year 2 and making it to Game 7 of the second round. Lane Lambert, in his first season, behind the bench, taking over for Dan Bylsma. There was some promise coming into the lineup this year with the acquisitions of Mason Marchment from Dallas, who had since been traded to Columbus, defenseman Ryan Lindgren, and forward Frederick Gaudreau. They started relatively well, going 11-5-5. Their goaltending, which I had questioned, and I think I sold you on during our summer coolers, wasn't terrible between Philip Grubauer and Joey Decord. But after the good start, the team went 1-9-1 between mid-November and mid-December. That was followed by an 8-0-2 run. But the inconsistency of this team was dotted throughout the schedule. They had 6 occasions where they had strings of at least 3 consecutive regulation losses. They were among the lowest scoring teams in the NHL. Some of their forward group that had been looked to taking a step up have kind of just settled into a very mediocre state. Jared McCann had 40 goals in 2022-23. He has dropped since then. Marty Beniers is around a 50-point player. Shane Wright, who is a high draft pick, has really not performed. And with Ron Francis now leaving this team and Jason Botterill having full control of the operations there, I think there's a lot of work ahead for this team.
There sure is, and it's surprising that you go from Ron Francis to Jason Botterill. I still don't know what's going on there. As you know, Ronnie was the GM for the inaugural team and started the franchise, and then somehow Botterill came in and Francis moved up to president, and now Francis is leaving as president, and it'll be Botterill by himself, who doesn't have a great track record from his time in Buffalo. They definitely have their work ahead of them. The other thing that they've been doing is changing coaches like most people change their underwear. I mean, they've been going from Hackstall to Bilesma to Lane Lambert, and nobody can get this thing going. They had one good playoff year when they knocked out Colorado, but other than that, it's been disappointing out there in Seattle.
Botterill has 8 picks in the 2026 draft, 2 in the first round, Seattle's own, and pick acquired from Tampa in the Oliver Bjorkstrand deal from last year. They also have 2 in the 4th and 2 in the 7th. $4.3 million in projected cap space. Their UFAs, Jaden Schwartz, Ellie Tolvanen, Bobby McMahon, who was acquired from Toronto at the deadline, and Jamie Alexiak, who was an original member of the Seattle Kraken. So I don't see this team next season being any closer than they were this year. I don't think they were a bottom feeder, but it's almost like they're going to be in suspended animation, at least for the next couple of years. I don't see a bump here.
No, I think they'll be kicking around trying to get into the wild card spot. I know we're repeating ourselves saying this, but there is a lot of work to be done here by Seattle in the offseason to try to nudge their way up the ladder.
And now it is time to bid some fond farewells for a couple of greats, one on the ice and one in the broadcast booth. And we start in the booth with Joe Bowen calling his final home game for the Toronto Maple Leafs on Monday against the Dallas Stars. There was a terrific tribute during the first TV timeout in the third period. Bowen really moved by it. He will travel to Ottawa for the season finale for the Leafs on Wednesday. But this was also a big reason that he retired, was that he wasn't traveling. And it's just so unfortunate that in Bowen's final year, this was one of the worst years for the Maple Leafs, or most disappointing in his entire career. And we had him on back in October, and I think we were so hopeful that he was going to get one final deep playoff run for the Maple Leafs, and it just never materialized.
No, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And of course, it has nothing to do with the broadcasters. Just like with Sam Rosen, he was a great broadcaster for the New York Rangers and went out with that non-playoff year a year ago. Joe Bowen, a great iconic broadcaster for the Leafs, goes out on a horrible year this year for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but not a horrible year for Joe Bowen, not a horrible year for Sam Rosen. Great talents in the broadcast booth, and they'll be missed.
A true legend in Toronto and part of their folklore forever.
For sure.
Jonathan Quick made his final NHL start as the Rangers fell in Florida 3-2 on Monday night. That game-winning goal coming with just a minute and 50 seconds left. For Quick, 19 seasons, 3-time Stanley Cup champion, 2 with the Kings, 1 with the Golden Knights, 2012 Conn Smythe Trophy winner, and the most wins by a U.S.-born goalie, 410. And right after the game, Quick went right to the locker room after the loss and then was called back out onto the ice where the Panthers were waiting for him. But what was interesting is that there were only 4 Panthers that were in Monday's lineup that played Game 6 against the Oilers in the 2025 final, but several members that were out injured did come out to greet Quick, and just a remarkable career.
A first ballot Hall of Famer for sure, Jonathan Quick. Grew up in Connecticut, idolizing the New York Rangers and Mike Richter. Quite a compliment to Mike Richter to have a goaltender who tried to follow his path actually turn out with more accolades than Mike himself. So good on Jonathan Quick. I still say he can play in the league, but you know what? Only you know when it's time for you to hang it up, and Jonathan Quick decided it's now the time.
That's a good transition to Ovi, because who knows? Went directly to the locker room after the Capitals' 2-1 win in Columbus on Tuesday. A camera was allowed into the locker room, and ESPN was on live with that camera in there. And John Buccigross seemed convinced that he's done. He watched him take off the jersey and said, that's a look of a guy that looks like he's played his last game. But the truth is, cameras aren't in the locker room after every game. And we don't know what Ovi looks like. And to me, this is 50-50. And perhaps there's something to be said here that in the game against Pittsburgh, where he waved the Penguins off, and last night, he goes right to the locker room, I don't think anybody knows. And I think this is a situation that he is going to have to sit and wait and decide and see if it feels right to come back.
My gut instinct is that he's doing the right thing because he's going to get the itch around the end of July, beginning of August, that he misses the guys in the locker room too much, and he misses the fun that he's had for all these years, and that he wants to give it one more go. And I think that's why he waved everybody off, because he doesn't know, and he's giving himself that opportunity to make the decision in the non-season. It would be tough for him. Let's say he did announce, yeah, I'm not coming back, and then in August got the itch that he wanted to come back. You know, that's a tough one. So it's better to do it this way. And if he comes back, everybody's happy. If he doesn't come back, everybody still salutes him in the way that they should for the great career he's had.
There's also a couple of numbers that are sitting out there that if he were to come back, he would pass Wayne Gretzky for the combined regular season and playoff goal total, and he finished the year at 929. If he came back for 2 years, he's got a shot at 1,000. Does that mean enough to him to come back?
Well, that's the whole question. Only he can answer that. And
yeah,
the thing is with athletes is they will stop playing when they're not performing to the level that they want to perform at. Doesn't matter what we think of them. It doesn't matter how good we think they are. If they don't think they're playing at the level they want to play at, they're not going to keep going. So that's a decision only he can make.
Reach us individually at Neil at NHLWraparound.com or Vic at NHLWraparound.com. We are on all podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and YouTube. Leave a review, or if you're tuning in via YouTube, please subscribe. You can also find us on X, Instagram, TikTok, and at Radiate.tv, as well as the new platform Buzzer. That's BZZR.com. Our website is NHLWraparound.com, and we're going to do your Smith's pick on this show today because there's only one game tonight that matters. You are carrying a record of 572 wins, 317 regulation losses, and 124 that you have gone down in either overtime or shootout. The one game that matters on Wednesday, Seattle Kraken visiting Vegas, and the Golden Knights needing 1 point to clinch your favorite division, that being the pathetic.
And I say that Vegas will get not only that point, they'll get another one with it. They'll get 2 points and win that game against the Kraken.
We still have 6 more spring cleanings to go. As we said, they will be released as quick takes, so look for them. Teams that get eliminated during the course of the playoffs will have their spring cleanings appear during Stanley Cup dates. A couple of big days coming up for us. Wraparound on Thursday. We're going to have Jeff Marek joining us to look back at our predictions that we made for the start of the season and our playoff preview, where Craig Button will join us once again.
And that's going to be so much fun. Both those shows are going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to those.
We'll see you tomorrow, folks.